Welcome everyone to the Global Education Colloquium at Drexel University. We are so excited to have an interactive session today with Dr. Bjorn Nordtveit. Dr. Nordtveit is Associate Professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where he's been working since 2011 after serving for 5 years as Research Assistant Professor at the University of Hong Kong. He's also served as visiting faculty at Zhejiang Normal University in China. Prior to joining academia, he worked for 12 years with UNESCO in the Lao People's Democratic Republic, or People's Republic, I don't know, Lao, PRD, PDR, I apologize, and with the World Bank, mostly in West African countries. He works on non-formal youth and adult education. His research, teaching, and writing focus on 3 areas. The first area is aid effectiveness in education and development, including public-private partnerships and integrated service provision. The second area is in child protection in context of adversity. And the third area is in critical and alternative epistemologies, including critical auto-ethnography, decolonial methods, and critical discourse analysis. His most recent book is Schools as Protection, Reinventing Education in Context of Adversity with Springer, 2016. Dr. Nordtveit is also editor of the Comparative Education Review, which is the journal of the Comparative and International Education Society. For those of you just joining us, welcome to the Global Education Colloquium. I will now turn it over to Dr. Nordtveit to get us going today.
Hi all, thanks for the nice introduction. I'm also going to introduce me a little bit more, but please let me know who you are. You can write it straight into the Mentimeter. And so essentially, I would like to know your name and pronouns. I'd also love to know whether you're a student, faculty, or practitioner, where you come from, if you feel comfortable with saying that, and any special interests of yours. So nothing of this is mandatory, but great to have the names at least. Just want to know a bit about you. So let's spend a minute on that. Welcome, Peter. Welcome, Nisha. Anything you'd like to say about yourself? Welcome, faculty. Welcome, Ashley. Welcome, Ian. Robotics. Wow. Okay. Welcome, Alia. We should have a number of other people here. If you want to speak out and tell who you are, if you want to use the chat, but if you have a phone connection, that would be great if you can just go to Mentimeter and welcome, Jennifer. For those just arriving, please go to Mentimeter and put in the code at the top of this slide. and introduce yourself. If you prefer introducing yourself in the chat, that's fine too. Welcome Brian from the chat. Welcome Krishna. Welcome Jose. All right, as we continue, please see if you can connect to your smartphone or to the Mentimeter, just because I have some questions for you and some reactions that I would like you to give me. Welcome Marcia, welcome Harlan. Thank you for putting your information in the chat. And I think I already mentioned welcome Jose. All right, let's move on. I'll introduce myself briefly. If anyone would like to share their names audio, that's fine too. Welcome, Christy. All right, for the newcomer who just entered, please go to menti.com and put in the code you see on the top of the slide. All right, so let me talk a bit about myself, the other part, the part that Christy did not say in her introduction of me. So this is a bit of a self-critique in many ways, and I'm going to question myself during this presentation. So my journey as an education field worker, a lot of the work that I've done is in the field, in being what is called a field worker. Like Christy said, I was in Laos, I've been in Iraq, I've been in a lot of countries in especially Francophone West Africa. So it's the journey of a white male in a non-white majority countries. It is that of an international education expert or international observer. When I was in Iraq, for example, I was international education observer looking at materials and activities going on in northern part of Iraq. So this is what I'm being called, what I'm perceived as international education expert. So I'm going to come back to that language, those notions. I'm that of a representative or perceived representative of a neo-colonial aid agencies with a specific political and economic agenda. And I'm going to come back to these points because I think that they're important as we see ourselves, as we discuss what we are in this structure. Another hat I have is, and this is the promotion part Christy already made, a short note about me being the editor of CER. And I think you probably have the hard copy. If you're a member of CIES, you might have the hard copy or the soft copy, online copy of the November 2020 issue. And there's a very nice article there that I would just like to recommend because it's not so far away from what we're talking about. It's the second article. It's written by Nigel Brissett from Clark University, and it's called Teaching Like a Subaltern, Postcoloniality, Positionality, and Pedagogy in International Development and Education. So if you're interested in this field, you should absolutely go to that and look at it. What he's speaking about is his view as an academic and his positionality as a Black person coming from South Africa, coming into the United States and teaching here. So very much recommended. For me, it will be almost the opposite, is my positionality as a white male going out and doing education work all over the world. So I'm speaking with a lot of self-criticism here, because I think that there's a questioning of the field that is necessary and that I'm going to come back to a little bit further on. So what I'm going to do in this presentation, I'm just going to set the stage first, the political background of comparative and international education. Then I'm going to speak about the academic practitioner, the field. We're always speaking about the field. We're not questioning that notion of the field, the research field. We're going to speak about the project, evaluation, sampling strategies, methodologies, past, present, and future, and hopefully set the stage for some optimistic thinking at the end that another world is possible. So my field of inquiry is comparative and international education. And some of you might be aware of the very political beginning and continuation of the field. It was intimately linked to creation of this Comparative and International Education Society. The journal, its journal, the Comparative Ed Review, it was intimately linked to the global projects of capitalism and communism, obviously. The problem was that the Soviet Union in 1957 launched Sputnik. Then they sent the first person into space in 1961, I believe. And all of that was a cause of massive trauma in the United States. It was a problem for the United States. What is going on? Over at the Soviet Union? Why are they ahead of us in the space race? Why are they doing so well? It must be that our education system is really bad. And over there, they looked at the education system of the United States and said, no, that's a capitalist, bourgeois, horrific system. That's the worst possible education system. That's what we don't want to do. So the CAES, actually, the Comparative and International Education, started off with study tours to the Soviet Union to try and figure out what they did, what was not happening over here in the United States. And in general, there's an interest in regions and matters that are considered political or economic threats to the USA. So the idea that there's a need for us being aware of what is going on out there is very strong. It was a strong starter. And you can see it in the National Defense Education Act of 1958. That was a direct reaction to Sputnik. And you see it in the terminology, and we're going to come back to this defense terminology that you see. So look at it, the name itself, National Defense Education Act. And to a large extent, the 1958 Act is still present in a lot of the implementation of education and international educational aid to this day. There was the 21st Century National Defense Education Act of 2006 that was mainly a reaction to the September 11 events and to terrorism, generally speaking. So we see this alliance between defense and education. So when I'm saying that we as academic practitioners, we're going out working for these agencies, it's not necessarily a neutral act. We might not be aware of it, but it might not be. So in terms of the development turn, this is also the name of a very interesting article by Gita Steiner-Kamsi. I believe the date is 2006. So if you Google the development turn with Gita Steiner-Kamsi, you'll get an interesting reference to the history of the field. So the decolonization and the political part, meaning that the government had figures, and the quote-unquote ownership of countries, or the coloniality as it was practiced formally, was largely completed in the 1960s. There was a de facto, or there was an independence of countries, and we should come back to how coloniality and colonialism just continued, but under very different forms after this. But anyway, these independent countries, or so-called independent countries, they were a matter of concern for the United States and also for the Soviet Union, because they could now develop a political path that would be different from, say, the United States. If they were former allies with the United States, they needed to continue being so. So the trade and political partnerships was a way of continuing this colonial influence, and became means of keeping the countries in the so-called right track, which obviously would be a capitalist / democracy track, at least apparently democracy track. If the country was allied with the United States, it would be a communist path. If it was allied with the Soviet Union. So it was to a large extent seeking to extend these global projects of capitalism and communism. And the aid to the former colonies, education aid, including education aid, was to a large extent going to former countries that were in direct dependencies. And Gita Steiner-Kamsi, in that article that I just mentioned, she calculated that Portugal provided about 97% of its development aid to former colonies. Belgium was doing a little bit less so, but it was still more than 50%, same with France and Great Britain. So the United States has been very consistent in establishing a its political strength in the Middle East. So a lot of aid is going to Egypt and Israel. At this point, the main recipient, I believe, is Afghanistan. So again, you see the linkage between the political, military, educational control over the area where the various countries are involved. So I just wanted to briefly speak about the American education strategies, because I think it's important in underlying the stage of how this is working. So here's for example, the US government strategy on international basic education for the fiscal years 2019 to 2023. Have any of you seen that or been involved in looking at that, analyzing it? No. Yes? No? Feel free to shout out. We don't have a big group here, so if you want to, just say, I have seen it, I like it. Well, so here's the thing. You see all the small icons on the bottom. So what is to the extreme right? Anyone can shout out. What do you see to the extreme right?
Is that USAID?
Yes, that's correct. So very good. So nobody would be very surprised by that. What is the extreme left? Anybody able to see that? No, probably difficult to see, unless you know unless you know it. It's probably too small.
Is that the defense?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. That's the U.S. Department of Defense. So when it's, for example, on page 11, speaking about alignment with the various strategies of the U.S. government, it is mentioning first the align with the pillars of the U.S. national security strategy. And specifically, it's mentioning Pillar 4 of the NSS, Advance American Influence. So I'm just mentioning that because I feel it's important that when we're speaking about ourselves going in the field, working for USAID and working for other organizations, maybe working, for Save the Children, and maybe working for, Red Cross, all of these nice names, all of these people receiving funding from the US government, it is backed by specific strategy on international basic education. So you have the critical partners are the private sector, academia, and implementing organizations. That's page 23. And it's kind of worth noticing how we are critical partners. Academia, that's us, isn't it? So us being students, being practitioners, being researchers, being instructors, academics, we are critical partners to the US government strategy on international basic education. So just want to make this clear that there's a link in what we are representing and what we're doing when we are in the field. And what I found interesting is that the first spotlight on the US in this is the US Central Command's or UCENTCOM education initiatives. So not only is the military present as in the strategy of the education plan, the military is also part of the education implementation. It's not only in the thinking, but it's also in implementation. So implementation of education and humanitarian support is partially done by the US military. So here is a Department of Defense. Here you can see the logo a little bit better, but this is the Annex 2, which is the first agency overview, the Department of Defense's commitment to international education. So that it conducts humanitarian assistance projects and including education sector projects in support of DoD and US government national security objectives. So it's all quite nicely linked. So I just had a question to you all. Did you know this? Do you have any comments, thoughts about this political positioning? So, do you think this is great because we have a lot of funding then, because DoD is not without funding? Or do you think that this is slightly worrisome? So please write your comments or shout out. You can talk as well. I'm curious. Don't worry, I'm not going to match your names to... I think that this is problematic. Thank you. Obviously, funding from almost any source will come with expectations, conditions. Yes. And they might not be specifically stated. Mixed feeling. I think the soft diplomacy approach can be very helpful, but this feels a little less soft. Yeah. And when you say helpful, what is it helpful in? That is a question that we need to question as well. It might be helpful in promoting American interest, but maybe not. Yeah, I think it's inevitable that this be the case. Yes, maybe. As an Egyptian, I'm always a little distrustful when it comes to political positioning because of hidden agendas, particularly because I worked on USAID-funded project in Egypt and experienced some lack of transparency. Thank you. That's a very interesting point. I was aware of the connection, but as the Department of Defense shifts and changes its missions related to education, it becomes more troubling. Early work on education diplomacy was more soft, exchange of teachers, students, scholars, but now yeah, I mean, it is. I agree to a large extent with a lot of what is written here. It is troubling for me. It's extremely troubling that there's this connection, and I I thank you for the comments, and I think that the problem with this is that we are in a sector that has unsaid objectives and strategies that we are not part, that we are little part of, but we don't know it ourselves to a large extent. So I'm coming to the specific topic of what we're going to speak a bit more about. It's the performance management or the evaluation strategies, and all these documents have huge sections on the performance management of the project, and it's really a multi-million, if not billion-dollar industry, depending on which level you put it at. USAID's project funding was over $40 billion for 2020. So if you look at the performance management work of, it's supposed to be 5 to 10% of total program resources. Not all of their funding is program resources, of course. So we have a lot of money in terms of performance management. And why is it that performance management is a huge thing to speak about for us who are in academia? It is because we are often part of that. We are seen as the go-to for independent, neutral evaluation. So it's really I feel that to an extent, education practitioners, we are brought into this to a large extent, not in the program conception phase, but sometimes in the project conception phase as well. It's a backup. It's a way of creating validity for the project. So essentially 5 to 10% of total program resources are not going necessarily to universities and researchers at universities, but a large part of it is going to universities. External performance and impact evaluations are set as 3% of the total, and this is US 2019, so it's the most updated USAID strategy. Other international agencies are less clear in their indication of percentages. If you find it, I would be interested in knowing, but I wasn't able in Googling and looking for various, agency reports. They were less clear about exactly how much they allocated to performance management work, and this has been the field of excellence of the academic practitioner of comparative and international education. So our academic field of comparative and international education has always been a large part of it has been either funded or research has been funded by these organizations to do some kind of performance management. So I also wanted to mention that in the evaluation sort of guidelines and setup, there's a lot of interagency initiatives, and here is one. The OECD Development Assistance Committee has a very strong evaluation setup, evaluation programs, evaluation definitions, and they are now in the launch of a new evaluation strategy that just started up in February 2020, just before COVID hit. So evaluation, they define it in an older definition that they still has on their website as the key reference, as the systematic and objective assessment of an ongoing or completed project, program, and policy, its design, implementation, and results. The aim is to determine the relevance and fulfillment of objectives, development efficiency, effectiveness, impact, and sustainability. An evaluation should provide information that is credible and useful, enabling the incorporation of lessons learned into the decision-making process of both recipients and donors. So it is a lot linked to this idea, this concept of neutral, being objective, being systematic. But of course, you're already evaluating a program that is inserted in a specific strategy that is linked to a full government strategy. So those might be some things to think about when you're going into an evaluation, feeling that it's very independent. So this is the 2020 framework that was launched just a year ago. So towards better evaluation, introducing the newly adopted evaluation criteria based on effectiveness, coherence, sustainability, efficiency, relevance, and impact. That was presented in UNDP in February 2020, and I just wanted, to speak a little bit and get your thoughts about some of this, because these are the people that are really streaming and creating this way of thinking in terms of evaluation, what we should do, how we should do it. These are the leaders of the field. And here specifically, I have pictures of the leaders of the field. The presentation was made by seemingly a Norwegian. I think it's the one at the side of the white woman. The white woman is probably Megan Kennedy Chuan, and the white man beside him is probably Per Øyvind Bastø. That sounds really Norwegian because of all the slashed O's right there. So I just wanted to ask you, what does this image inspire in you? So I'm going to take away the image and just go and give us some of your ideas about what this is inspiring in you. Attempting diversity, that's nice. Diversity represented, different voices. Technocrats, experts, file diversity, I like that. Inclusion-ish, I like that too. Looks photoshopped, maybe. Older, yeah. Professionals, formality, bureaucratic. Yeah, I agree with a lot of these characteristics, if not all. There is a sort of feeling of this stuffy, stuffy group of people who are telling other people what to do and being part of how they should be evaluated. So I think it's nice to have this little conversation on what they look like. because I think it's part of the picture, part of the way that we can think about it. So the academic practitioner, at times I prefer calling it educational missionary. Why the French term missionnaire is used in the DRC, Senegal, and other countries to characterize development workers sent by the World Bank or working with other international agencies. So I was introduced in Senegal, for example, as le missionnaire de la Banque Mondiale, the missionary of the World Bank. And when I was working for American institutions, I was le missionnaire de Département du Travail aux États-Unis. So I was this missionary representing then presumably the good word or the good tidings of those agencies that I represented. So I just want to talk about the way that we perceived when we are in the field. And I wanted to get into this, the problematic issues of this, the unequal power dynamics that it represents. It doesn't, when we looked at that picture, nobody mentioned it, but it didn't look like a group. It looked like a very self-content, self-happy group that was presenting their evaluation criteria. It didn't look like someone that I would like to say, hey, have you thought about this? And they would say, yes, of course we have. We have looked at every angle possible. So I felt it was a very technocratic group, a very self-contained group. And I see it a lot, that there's unequal power dynamics. It's a technocratic language reflecting those power dynamics. It's imposition of a very specific vision of education. And the notion of the field is often seen as being an abstract entity away. And I wanted to problematize the field. What does it represent to you? What is the field? Where is the field? What is how do you think about it? And here we're speaking about the field as a setting in which field research or evaluation takes place. So I just want, type in very quickly. We don't have that much time left, but what is your notion of the field? The field is the real world. That's interesting. The field is everywhere. That's interesting too. I like that. Do we have a couple of more? I'll give you. I like both of these. Let's see. We have another one coming up. The field is what you want it to be. Yeah. Social constructs, that means different things to different people. Yeah, that's an interesting and good way of looking at it. You can define the field as you wish, and then it will be what it is. So here's a definition that was given by Jennifer Hindman in 2001, and she was one of the missionaries going around. And she called it a network of power relations in which I am a small link. And I thought that was quite useful as an explanation of the field. And a lot of the countries in which I've been working has a horrific history of white supremacy. For example, in DRC, previously it was called the Congo Free State. In the Congo Free State, it existed in 1885 to 1908, and during that period, the Congo Free State was the personal domain. It was the first personal park, for lack of a better word, of King Leopold of Belgium. So King Leopold instaured a horrific way of dealing with the local population based on forced labor. And they practiced inhumane practices such as cutting hands off when they're not delivering what they needed to deliver in terms of harvesting and other things. And it was so bad, it led to a genocide of about 10 million people, according to Mbuti's estimates. And there's various estimates. It's very difficult to find out how much the genocide affected the population. It was probably around over 10% of the population that was killed during those years. It was so bad that the Belgian government took over the Congo Free State from the king and made it a colony. And so the Belgian domination was based on the colonial trinity of the state, missionaries, and private companies. So, so when I'm called a missionnaire in French, a missionary, then it has a backstory that is horrific. It has a backstory that is linked to the colonial times. And I think that that's hugely problematic. And it also makes me question to which extent some of the work we're doing is not perpetuating these same colonial attitudes and educational practices. So coming back to the evaluation part of the projects, what is called the gold standard of evaluation is randomized controlled trials, and the American strategy that I just showed a picture of the cover page of, the 2019-2023 strategy for basic education. Only the Department of Labor's educational strategy spoke explicitly about randomized controlled trials as being the gold standards of evaluation. The other agencies also use it, but they were not so explicit in it. So treatment, which is the educational program or plan, may be randomized at individual or cluster levels. So this is important. It's often randomized as cluster levels. And these RCTs play a critical role in evidence-based policymaking. That's what it's called, evidence-based policymaking. And everybody's speaking about this as a very important term. I was working both with the British and with the American government in DRC, in Democratic Republic of Congo. And both governments wanted evidence-based data-based decision-making. Everything needed to be evidence-based. And if you came up with more anecdotal evidence, or if you came up with own observations, it was not evidence-based. It needed to be shown that it was through the data collection that was considered valid. This kind of RCT setup is seen as equitable because all eligible units have the same chance of receiving the program. What does that mean? It means that if you're community A or B, you'll be assigned to being either the treatment or the control community. The control community do not receive anything. And this was randomized when I was in DRC. It was randomized as cluster education, cluster levels, meaning schools. So some schools received it and some schools did not receive it. And if you told the people in the control group that this was equitable, they would say, no, it's not equitable because we didn't receive anything. So the qualitative evaluation and the qualitative research that was done was taking place as well as quantitative and was part of the same sampling strategy. So what I'm saying is that this performance management is directly linked to the implementation, where you implement and how you implement. That's set up by the performance management system. And that leads to a lot of problems. So many of the programs are too short to allow phase-in. That's a technical term, meaning that you give the treatment, you give the program, the project, the intervention, the funding, whatever it is, you give it also to the control group, but you give it later. So first you check it out, you test it out with the treatment group and with the control group, and then you implement it to everyone so that it's real equity. But many programs and projects are too short to allow that to happen. So in other words, the control group is just getting nothing. They just have a bunch of people coming and asking the same questions every time, irritating the heck out of people, and the people are saying, well, why are you coming here? We don't want you here. We don't like having you here. You're coming with nothing. You're not supporting us. And there's an extreme frustration in the control population at times. And there's possible adverse effects that I've seen, that students and teachers are switching to treatment schools. Why shouldn't they? Those schools have better programs, they have more support, they have this, they have that. And for programs offering free non-formal education, there's a problem that some children are dropping out of formal schools to receive shorter free education. That is not directly linked to the sampling, but it's part of the overall performance management strategies and problems that is linked to it. So the other issues, when I went around, for example, in the DRC, the schools were characterized as necessary and useful. Everybody had the same language about how wonderful these schools were, and it wasn't really affirmed by my own observations in the schools. So I wondered how much of the discourse was changed as an effect of the outsider, of me coming in, and about the treatment and the performance management, like we coming in, asking all the questions. I was not alone there. There was a big group of us. And how does that have an effect on the RCT? We are saying that that's the gold standard, but if people are speaking to please us, and if people are also speaking because of a conception of this missionary status that is inherited from the colonial time, then maybe they just, want to say whatever we want to hear so that they could be left in peace as soon as possible and make this as painless as possible for everybody involved. So I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. What I observed was that schools were punitive and controlling institutions. There was a lot of whipping, of physical corporal punishment going on. And I felt that to a large extent the schools continued the colonial model of educational management. And the performance management of the project, in its focus on evaluating specific treatments and interventions, I don't think that they provided adequate replies on how to generate real change. Coming into conclusion and allowing a bit of time for Q&A, I wanted to question my own presence in educational missionary work. I wanted to question myself as it may be perpetuating colonial framework and scaffolding of education. And I think it's serious, and we need to look into what these agencies and what we are doing as part of these agencies. And to an extent, it raises the question of validity of much of CIE, because a lot of the research is as people are going from the outside into other countries and looking at other people, evaluating other people, coming in as the educational experts. That's what we are training you for. This is what your training is in whichever university you're based at, be it UMass, Drexel, or anywhere, you are being trained to become that educational expert. So the comparative and international education society, if you look at it as a whole, it has been and still is to a large extent white male. It's educational experts traveling and offering advice on educational practices, evaluating outside funded projects. And Jennifer Hindman, in that article I referred to a little bit earlier, said that people had asked her in a refugee camp if she was one of the tourists. And she was problematizing the way that people looked at her, because she felt like that. She felt that she was doing educational tourism, and she raised some very serious self-aware questions on what is the field, what are we doing there, and what is our place there. So the future of the educational missionary, I think to a large extent, is that there is a privileged position of the educational expert, and it's important to use that well, to use it positively, to generate positive change, to question the system, to question the structure of international aid. There's a need of critical auto-ethnographies. I hope some of you will write some of them. And as I said in the CER last issue, November 2020, we had a wonderful article using that approach. But there's a very important role to play in the future for the educational missionaries to become something else than missionaries, to become agents for change. So I think that's important. I think another world is possible where there's use of local resources and bottom-up strategies. This has been promoted by post-development academics and practitioners, but also some agencies. The World Bank had a report speaking about the short route of accountability, which is essentially having a bottom-up evaluation structure, that the route of accountability started with the community itself looking at whatever came in to these. And of course, for the World Bank, it was to a large extent compared with the long route, which was said to be the government. But I think that there's another one, the extra long route of accountability, which is to bring us educational missionaries in, and instead of the government, and doing evaluation and performance evaluation work. So I think that that maybe not adopting the World Bank terminology here, but thinking about how the route of accountability can be much shorter. I think that is an important part of the work to be done. And I think there's also ideas about transformative research and evaluation methods. There's transpersonal ways of implementing evaluation and research. There's ways of doing it that is seen as transformative, both for the people being partners in the countries, the people that we are working with, and the people that are coming in themselves. So it's a transformative experience at all levels that could be part of the future evaluation and performance management work. So some of those are ideas. I believe that another world is possible. I believe that there's a need for a shift, and I hope that you agree with me in at least some of these points. And I thank you for your attention. I thank you for your comments and your interaction. And now we will go to questions and comments to my talk. We have a few minutes, and then if anyone wants to go over time, if you have specific questions, if you want to interact, not using the phone, that's fine too. Just speak out. Thank you very much for your attention.
I think everyone is super excited. Thank you so much for an incredible presentation and so much to think about here. We will open it up. You can chat your question in. You may open your microphone. You may menti.com, your questions or comments or responses or reflections.
Dr. Nordtveit, I have a question. So we were talking about how the ethics, I guess, behind sampling and how that basically takes away from communities the opportunity for programs that could help to improve the quality of education. What suggestions do you have for possible ways to decolonize the sampling requirement or the sampling process?
So when I was with the funders of the program, I suggested that they had a phase in, and that is used in RCTs, that you had them be in control for a part for evaluation standards. And that's a very technocratic way of getting about it. And you can say and argue with me, and I would be in agreement with you, that everybody should receive it from the start. But the one of the problems is also, the what is received, because the focus is on STEM, the focus is on specific skills. The focus is not, it is to make schools more child friendly, but attitudes like corporal punishment is still going on. So is it really leading to a change? That is a different question. We were supposed to evaluate that, but often what we evaluated was just the general performance of each activity. In other words, how much more a kid could read because of the intervention. And we have a couple of questions. In your experience, thank you, Neisha. Did I reply to your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. In your experience as an education missionary, how often did you find that the viewpoints of local experts and educators were taken into consideration? So there's various local experts, and a lot of the local experts are themselves education missionaries, and some are more formal and more technocratic than me. In many cases, I've been going out with Ministry of Education specialists, and they are to a large extent very formal. And how couldn't they and shouldn't they be? They have often an education from very prestigious U.S. institutions or European institutions. They carry a narrative that is the same as the funding agencies. To which extent were they taken into consideration? They were taken into consideration. It wasn't. I did not feel that it was a full imposition. I felt that some agencies are better than other at the project conception phase, that they brought in more local experts. I've seen a lot of projects being implemented in a very top-down way, as being written almost exclusively by white experts sitting in a different country, writing up a project proposal that is then being funded. So in that case, the viewpoint of local experts come way too far, way too late into taken into consideration, way too late. Hopefully that was clear enough. Feel free to have a backup question if I don't answer to your satisfaction. Thank you for that positive comment. Education missionary. Oh, I don't like it. I invented it and I don't like it. I did not invent the missionnaire, the way that people call me missionnaire. I invented the education missionary, because I think that we're preaching a gospel, and sometimes we don't know what the gospel is, but we're preaching it because we've learned to preach it. And I'll give you an example. My PhD is on a World Bank project in Senegal, and I worked for this project for a long time. And one of the questions I had to myself, am I doing the right thing? Is this a good project? Am I doing the good thing for in this field of Senegal? And I came to the conclusion that I needed to know more about it. And hence I started my PhD with that basic question. what is this project about? Because the action itself was to provide education to illiterate people, mostly women. It was a projet priorité femme, meaning priority for women. It was providing then educational opportunities to poor women who hadn't had any such opportunity. It was using local, small organizations and community-based organizations to implement it. But then, as I went in and looked at this, I saw that my own role was to provide a specific education structure, which was essentially a privatization because it went through these local small groups. It was probably better than being by big international organizations that were not much involved in this. But nevertheless, it was a privatization, so I needed to be aware of that. It was a bypassing of the government. And then my question to myself is that, is this finally poor education for poor women? Is that the aim for this, is to displace this content? And this is an author used that specific phrase of displacing this content, giving them the minimum education so they don't ask for more. So I didn't come up with a straightforward answer in my PhD. I was, to an extent, I was thinking that some of it was good, some of it was bad. And at that time, I did not question so much my own positionality as a white male in doing this work. But it was very clear for me that I was the agent, the missionary of a specific vision. The education missionary gospel of the World Bank was very much a gospel of privatization and about development of small community-based organizations in Senegal. And that might be a good positive things to an extent, but if all of them are just becoming businesses for the World Bank, then that's another issue to be thought about. So thank you for that question. What role can academia and CIES play in developing research funding support that don't trap student scholars into taking these consulting gigs to fund their own research? Paradigm change? Oh, that's a big question. I think there's a need for paradigm change. There's a need, like I said in my concluding remarks, there's a need for us to question our own role. And of course, it's difficult to try and influence at the level of USAID and these huge, gigantic organizations. And there's a whole business system in all of these international organizations that are sending education missionaries everywhere in the world. All the NGOs that you might have already worked with, I've certainly worked with them. I've worked for various organizations, including Catholic Relief Services. I've been working with Save the Children, working with various contracted by UNICEF, and working with UNICEF, which is a UN organization. Obviously, it's a bit different. Worked with UNDP and UNESCO being UN organizations. It is very difficult to take them away from this expert mentality that we need these educational experts roaming around in the world. But I think that I think that the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States has started a lot of questioning of these roles also in international development. And I think that in scholarly journals, including the Comparative Ed Review, we've seen to an extent a shift from the idea of people going out, to a large extent white and male, people going out in the field, or whatever they characterize as the field, and coming back writing the story about their tourism and writing up some policy recommendations. We have had a shift in more critical and engaged pieces, and we're certainly encouraging that as a journal. So I think that those are small steps of changing the attitude, have a more introspective to an extent and critical attitude of what we're doing.
Oh, can I ask a follow-up question on that one?
Yep.
I'm just curious because at the beginning of your presentation, you had talked about, the troubling aspect of these organizations providing the funding, right, and the donor. So if you wanted to step away from it completely, what options are there? Even typical funding, schemes that we rely on in U.S. context, Fulbright, FLAS, the kinds of fellowships for doing international work and geographic specific areas, those are shrinking and they're still tied to State Department funds. Other groups are getting involved in, wanting mixed methods, much more quantitative analysis, less field work. Like, what is the future of this? How do we as a field kind of speak back to it and create our own funding schemes?
And it's a very good question, and I've asked myself these questions quite a lot. And I think the next question is exactly about that. How do you navigate the space of program evaluator if your positionality stands in contrast to the underlying ideology? So it is very complicated, and to an extent, I don't know the full answer to it. I think there isn't that much funding that is just ready to be taken for anything that is not related to specific interests of specific organizations. If you suggest a program evaluating STEM methodologies for teaching STEM in various contexts, you might get funded, but you're part of that narrative. Do you want to do other work at the same time as you're doing that work? And then that is also possible. And then what about those of us being white and male? Should we go and evaluate education in Norway instead of going to, countries where we maybe represent a remembrance or a continuity of colonial attitudes? Those are other very tough questions. And how you then navigate the space of program evaluator if your positionality stands in contrast to the underlying ideology is perfectly formulated question. And it will be up to the consciousness of an awareness of each of us. To an extent, the reason I did my PhD was to question my positionality. It wasn't as a white male, it was my positionality at that point as a promoter of the gospel of the World Bank. And I was asking myself, is that the right gospel? And I discontinued working with the World Bank. I left the World Bank and went into academia because I felt that was a position that allowed me to reflect on the issues in a different way. Then I've been evaluator for many years, and I felt increasingly uncomfortable with being it because of my positionality. So it's a good question. So I have no field evaluations planned for the next few years, and I might not go back to it. I might try and reflect on the field in a different way in the future. But it's a very good question that I've asked myself many times. Thank you. What phrase would you prefer to use instead of, I assume that this is linked to educational missionary. I'm using educational missionary ironically as the preacher of a gospel, and it's a heavy irony. It's not a positive one. So the positive term has been the academic practitioner. That sounds too neutral for me. That would be nice if we were really academic practitioners who did not represent any agency from other institutions and from other agendas. So I would prefer using academic practitioners if we were really that, if we did not, promote a specific gospel, even if we are aware of it. Following these criticism of the system as it is and the ulterior motives driving aid, do you think international aid as education or otherwise should be scaled back? Again, very good, very complicated question. I think it should be changed. I think it should probably be scaled up, but in a different way. I think if you look at international trade, if you look at military spending, if you look at anything really, the part of international aid is very small. The fact that even that very small is being used to bolster countries' defense systems is pathetic. So, sorry for my direct wordings here, but I think it's very problematic. And I think it should be scaled up, but in a very different way. But that's wishful dreaming. I would want a different world, and I hope and believe that maybe over time another world is possible. In feminist theory space, we talk about missionaries and mandarins, two different troubling forms of education and development intervention. Mandarins are in the government. That's nice. I'm going to take a screenshot of this because I thank you for that comment.
Bjorn, I'm acknowledging that we're a little running over time, and I see we're almost at the end, but I just wanted to thank you very much. And if you have some sort of concluding comments, but also those of you who would like to stay online, we're happy to continue the conversation. We're just going to shut the recording. For those that need to leave and have other events, please join us April 7th. For our next event, which is Morgan Ames, who is coming to present her research on the one laptop per child policy and how that has gone awry in different contexts as well. So thank you all, and thank you, Bjorn. Sorry to cut you off.
Thank you. No, not at all. Thank you all for being here with me. And thank you for your reflections, for your questions, for your comments. I will stay on for a little bit. I have time, so if you have any specific questions, you can either use the Mentimeter or just speak up, whatever you feel the most comfortable with. So I see I have already a question, which I will answer, but in the meantime, I fully understand for those needing to leave, and thank you for being here. For those wishing to remain, please do so. Thank you all.